I thought was an interesting chat with GPT earlier, and wanted to just speak on it a bit, as how ideas come out when we're speaking them as opposed to when we're writing them are, two different brain processes and two different ways of extrapolating, collating, synthesizing ideas. And so what I'm trying to do is complement that discussion and expand on it in different ways that, when we're thinking about certain ideas and concepts, our mind has a way of tying together tangents and information streams from different sources based on things we've exposed ourselves to, things we've studied, things we believe, things we, comprehend and grasp. And certain words will trigger certain, trains of thought and roads that we end up going down when we're trying to express an idea or speak about something. And it's very different in a conversation such as the one I had with ChatGPT, because ideas come out in different ways. And of course, it's a dialogue, not just a solo kind of a podcast like this video and these videos in the series are, which are one directional based, and the process that's going on in my mind, putting together certain ideas relevant to, related to the idea, the principle, the concepts I'm trying to present or explain in that way. So it's two different animals. So it's fascinating to me as a philosopher, a conscious observer type, as someone who's always trying to discern the truth and better provide ideas, inspirations, concepts, and the like in a more cohesive manner. So with my blog writings, with the GPT chats, with these videos, my hope is that they're complementary and that somehow, in some way, regardless of the way in which you like to take in information. Some people like to listen, some people prefer to watch, some people prefer to, of course, read and take in information. And it's all different parts of the brain, different parts of our psyche and psychological and emotional and cognitive processes, right? How we take in this information, how we process it, and how we're able to make it fit in with our established paradigms and belief systems, or challenging those said systems, which can be quite difficult. So, and again, take it all with a grain of salt. Don't necessarily believe anything I say or what I offer. It's just information, it's data, it's a perspective, it's opinion, it's ideas based on my particular path, my particular way of exploring this life, and the ideas and information that's come across my path. And my hope, of course, is that it's offering something to trigger a little bit of curiosity, to help you ask better questions, to help you be a little more curious about the mystery that is life, and to pursue these avenues of research and study in different ways. And specific to the chat, at the end of pretty much every chat, I try to offer or ask GPT to offer a list of resources, speakers, books, authors, documentaries, further avenues of study should somebody be interested in. There's often quite an interesting list of things that come up, as there was today. So either we summarize with some kind of a manifesto, which is interesting when it happens, or if nothing else, there's always going to be a list of resources and information based on the topic, based on the things that emerged throughout that discourse, throughout that thread, that discussion, that may interest you or someone to pursue these things more in earnest, to delve a little deeper, to explore more deeply, and take a much more interrogative or critical thinking, scrutinizing process, or simply just being further entertained by the idea of what if, blah, 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 whatever topic might have been discussed in that particular chat, and the things that it might have triggered in you, or the questions that might have emerged or brought up within you, right? So today I was listening to another podcast with the Fair Food Forager. I hope I'm not messing up that name. Regardless, he had a couple of guests on, authors, researchers that were talking about Antarctica, and quite fascinating story that continues to be, that comes and goes in public consciousness. It's been quite prevalent this year because of the people that were allegedly sent down there to record the 24-hour sun, stuff like that. I'm not going to touch on that topic now because it's not related to this particular thread, and I haven't looked into it much myself, and there are a number of interviews and documentaries I need to explore myself before I can really comment. There's a lot of holes in that story. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of misinformation, especially in the public, in the mainstream. Why is there such a concerted effort from I don't know how many countries that signed the agreement that says nobody can go past, 60 degrees south. That's a huge red flag, for crying out loud. What are you hiding? Why can't we go? And what is 60 degrees south? Why is Antarctica so important? Why do you have to quite literally shoot planes down and sink boats that are trying to get past your little militarily enforced barrier? Interesting, right? So there's a lot to explore there, but again, it's another one of these rabbit holes. It can keep you forever chasing and never really knowing, because unless you can go in person like these, researchers and truthers and such who were paid to go allegedly did go and saw with their own eyes, the idea, the final experiment, or whatever this nonsensical narrative was attached to that particular event. I think it was primarily to dispel the idea of the flat earth and that particular paradigm and perspective. And globe earth, flat earth doesn't really matter in my perspective. If you're looking for evidence to support a certain belief or paradigm, you will find it. This reality will provide that for you. In my observation, there's no chance we're living on a globe. And that's based on, stuff and experience and information I've come across and learned, and what my own eyes see and have learned to see over the last decade. So you'll discover that for yourself. But it's important to know whereupon you stand. What is the nature of this reality? Does it even matter if it's flat and stationary, or a orb spinning at ridiculous rates in a vast vacuum of nothingness around some exploding balls of gas, on and on and on. Figure that out for yourself. I'm not going to argue either way. I've had discussions. I've had ChatGPT chats. I've written about it on the blog over the years. So maybe I'll touch on it in a video in the future, but not today. But getting back to the topic at hand, today the idea that popped back into my brain was the Metonic cycle, which is a 19-year cycle in which the phases of the moon end up falling on the same days of the year again, if I'm remembering correctly. And it is a 19-year cycle. And the two most recent events that happened to fall on this Metonic cycle were the events of 2020 and 2001, 19 years apart. Interesting that. And what did they call the event of 2020? Had a 19 in the name, right? Why not 20? And you go back to September of 2001, 911. There's a 19 in there, isn't it? And then out of curiosity, I thought, well, what other events might fall on previous 19-year cycles back? And interestingly, just in the last century, some of the rather significant events of our time, of our era, happened to fall on that 19-year cycle. I'm talking specifically 1963, 1944. Look those up if you need to reaffirm for yourself just what major historical events happened on those particular years. And okay, there's one cycle, the Metonic cycle. And the discussion evolved and ultimately came to the end, an idea of what I was trying to do and what I'm always trying to do. And in this particular chat, it was, I think it coded the phrase of deciphering the ritual operating system, which I think was rather apt. Again, trying to get to these principal things and the underlying ideas that are playing here and playing out in our world, and the scripted nature of our reality, and calendrics and calendars and events and where they're put in calendars, and how I believe, and others who've researched this far more deeply than I, such as Jason with Archaix and Immanuel Velikovsky, and on and on and on, all of which are mentioned in that chat. They have found plenty of evidence from historical record and otherwise to dispel the nonsense of the mainstream narrative and the historic nature and where events belong, and even some of the characters involved. All of these things can be and are likely in many instances completely fabricated, manufactured. And these our calendars, especially our modern Gregorian calendar, all of these specific and annual type events, annual holidays, and ritualistic type things are filled into the calendars ex post facto, after the fact, right? To perpetuate certain narratives of the timeline, to perpetuate certain ideas and belief systems, to perpetuate certain lies, or obscure, obfuscate, hide certain historical events cleverly in plain sight, basically, right? As they do with any of these things. you obscure and bend these things, and then you make memorial events, and then you repeat and repeat year after year, generation after generation, these ideas that get instilled into the consciousness. And how many of us will ever really question the origin story, the veracity of these events, the legitimacy of the characters, heroes or villains involved, whether they even existed? And even within my generation, it's evident just how extreme some of these events, stories, narratives are entirely fabricated, entirely misconstrued, distorted, obfuscated from what actually happened and who was actually involved, right? So when we start looking back at even just the Metonic cycle, that's one of many cycles, and referring again to Archaix and what Jason's work has done with his chronological studies, his Chronicon. Jason's got the Phoenix cycle, 138 years, and then multiples of that, and he's shown throughout his research that there's an absolute predictable, repetitive, mathematical precision, which lends, of course, to the idea of the simulacrum and the simulated nature of our reality. Take of that what you will, but he's not the first one to do so, right? I mentioned Velikovsky, and there's others, and I believe Jason recently came into ownership of a book published in 1754, very much similar to his work in the Chronicon. It's an 1,100-page, encyclopedic study, collation, synthesis, same idea of a chronological study based on evidence and the records that whoever put that book together was able to record and collate and organize and synthesize in 1754, which is humbling to someone such as Jason, because he, in the modern era, of course, he's not the first one to do these things. He's just one of the newer iterations of that type of chronological and catastrophist research and study, linking these historical events, who's had the time to go in and dive deeply into different books from different sources, different cultures and things, and you see the patterns emerge, and you start to realize that this is a very specific repeating protocol of sorts, right? So I thought it would be interesting to explore that particular pattern recognition type discussion based on the initial idea of the Metonic cycle, which is a very short one, 19 years. And then there's others that are related, the Saros cycle, the Saturn's return. They're all in the chat there if you want to look into it more deeply. They're briefly listed. It doesn't go terribly in depth because that's not the purpose of my chats in particular. I'm all about trying to get the underlying foundational principle idea, as I've spoken about. The whys and the whos perhaps, but the energy, the cyclical nature, the pattern recognition, and of course the deciphering of this ritualistic operating system, which I think we did. We dispelled some of that, we explored some of that, and exposed, some of that based on a very brief discussion about how these cycles seem to repeat, and there's specific dates throughout known history that seem to line up conveniently on these cycles, whether or not it's true. And again, going back and back and back, it becomes more and more difficult for someone in the modern era to be able to prove the veracity of any of these events, to actually link them properly to any date, because as we've discussed, the events, the people involved, the heroes, the villains, and especially the date these things allegedly happened is suspect, unless you're able to do any sort of deep dive, unless you're able to start picking apart and actually find some way to collate this information, to actually research original source material, on and on, right? How can you prove it for yourself that it wasn't just installed after the fact? How can you, and are you willing to go in depth into any of these things to discern, discover, and figure out whether or not the people involved who allegedly perpetrated these things or were the heroes, or because history is written by the victors. So what we have in the West is different from what they have in the East as to historical events, who was involved, why it happened, how many people died, who were the heroes, who were the villains, who were the perpetrators, on and on, right? And the greater point, of course, is that these things seem to happen quite predictably on small cycles and big cycles. And the further argument was that there, in my point of view, there are multiple factions in this shadowy evil side of humanity that are playing out different stories, different paradigms, different agendas, different ideologies on their own schedule, for their own beliefs, based on their own ritualistic or symbolic operating system. So it's interesting. It's perhaps something that may be of interest to you if you're looking to, discern these patterns. But most importantly is to be able to reclaim that awareness and that consciousness, and to diffuse any of these events should they and when they come up again, because they will. They always do, as we've seen throughout history. And as I mentioned, these two main events in the last 2 years of 2020 and 2001 were at specific times apart. That didn't happen by accident, right? And of course, to me, these are both completely false flag staged, manufactured events, which created inflection points and dramatic shifts in consensus collective consciousness. So they were used as these ritualistic, symbolic shifts in public consciousness, whether it's to push, the surveillance or biosecurity state. That's for you to decide. Nevertheless, they happened. They were dramatic. They were remarkably impactful, right? They shook the earth, as it were. So it's upon us to study and understand these things and to realize that's just part of the script. That's part of the pattern. It's part of some ritualistic, symbolic operating system, so that we can take back the power and diffuse these things, and to be better aware of and to discern and better understand when it happens again, to realize that we're not going to give our power to that. We're not going to fear it. We're not going to be panicked. We're not going to be traumatized. And the only way to do that is to understand the underlying nature, the underlying energy, the principles, the ideas, and this operating system that's at play, right? So learn from it. Learn as much as you can, and learn to dispel the fear, paranoia, worry, trauma, anxiety. Take it all back, right? Take that back. Take back that creatorship that they keep wanting to steal and repurpose. Take back that authorship of your reality narrative, your construct, and don't let them own your story, own your emotions, own your heart, your mind, right? That's what's important about this entire discussion. Whether or not there's patterns, whether or not it's a simulation, we're here, we're in it, we're part of it, we're co-creating it. So we need to be aware of how much we might be giving away of our consciousness, of our comprehension, of our paradigm, of our belief system, and how much of it is being forced upon us and coerced into us, how much of history is being obfuscated, etc. And that, I hope, the idea is to empower, to uplift, to amplify the light, as it were. And that comes just from seeing it for what it is, seeing the truth of what is really going on. Have a good one.
It's been coming down every other day, but they tell me we are in drought season. That's not my story, not my reality. No matter what you force my eyes to see, and the sky is falling right on top of me, but they tell me it's for the